Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this is Right Angle. You know, if property rights are the foundation of a capitalist society, of a constitutional republic, imagine there's no property. And here's what I'm talking about. I read an article recently I believe at futurist.com that talked about how the new generation of young people, and not just young people, but some geezers like me, are starting to decide that they don't need to own everything that they enjoy.
That's communism.
That is communism. It's raucous, terrible, awesome communism. So in the late 1960s, about 1973, there was an idea called Rent-A-Center. It eventually became known as Rent-A-Center. And the idea there was that you didn't have to buy a sofa. You could actually lease your sofa. And eventually you could lease electronic equipment like computers and stereos and things like that. And so Rent-A-Center would charge what many consider to be a confiscatory interest rate, essentially, to rent you this stuff. And a lot of people who didn't have the means to go out and buy a new dining room set did find the cash flow to be able to rent it. And so even though they wind up paying 2 or 3 times what it ordinarily would cost, they did that. Well, Rent-A-Center, as of 2015, was a $3.27 billion a year business. That was their revenue for that year with 22,000 employees. Wow. But that wave didn't, end there. As most of you know, music, which, I used to have a record collection of 300 albums that were all, they weighed like 700 pounds and I had to carry them from one place to another every time I moved. Now I enjoy more music than I ever have, and I don't really use any albums. The same thing with software. When you bought software, remember when you used to have, you have to get the operating system running, there were like 32 floppies, or like WordPerfect required 32 floppy disks that you'd have to put in one after
Please
another.
enter the 64-digit password manually.
Or dongles that actually went into the
serial
computer.
Number,
Those are the worst.
And now software is a download on the internet. Adobe really took it, it really popularized the idea of software as a service. Microsoft is doing the same thing with Office 365. And so that's happening. And then you've got Uber and Lyft, which first started as really kind of a replacement for taxis, kind of a free market solution for taxi cabs. But more and more people are using it as a free market solution for owning a car. They're basically saying, well, why should I bother owning a car when I don't have to drive it all the time? I may have to take a few trips each week rather than pay for the insurance and the maintenance and risk of collision and repairs and all that kind of stuff. I think I'll just call an Uber whenever I need it. There are now not only ride sharing apps like that, but also the idea that you could pick up somebody else's car somewhere. Like you, Bill Whittle, could make your bitchin' Camaro available to anybody who wants to use it while you're not using it. So while you're there...
No, I couldn't.
So anyway, all of this, when you think of the idea of property in the United States, most people think of real property in terms of real estate, in terms of farmland and houses and things like that. But property rights in a culture that has increasingly saying, I don't need to own it. What happens to the foundation of law in that kind of a society? Is this a great thing, a new innovation, or is this something scary, Bill?
It's scary as hell, man. You were talking when we were talking about our conference call yesterday that, and I've seen this with my own eyes many times, that most millennials have no desire to get a driver's license, can't understand why they would possibly need a driver's license. And as these self-driving cars start to come online, you make a better and better case that you don't need one. And my immediate thought is that is absolutely horrifying. Private ownership of a car is not about transportation. It's about freedom. And if you don't ever have the experience, we've had it, but these kids don't. And I mean this sincerely. It's easy, I pity them. I pity the fool. No, I genuinely have genuine, real pity for these guys. Because if you're a teenager today, you don't know the experience of walking onto a car lot, a used car lot, and seeing nothing but 200 rusted out, old jalopy pieces of crap. And then all of a sudden, one of those rusted out jalopy pieces of crap is your rusted out jalopy piece of crap.
And you take care of it.
And then it's not that at all. Right, you wash it, you wax it, you do everything you can within your budget limit. Back in the day, you used to be able to soup up the engine and all the rest of it. But the idea that this is my car, and if I'm not joking, if we lose the idea, and we are losing it, and it's going, if we lose the idea that this is my car and I can go anywhere I want to in it, and it's mine, and I'm going to take care of it in a way that I would not take care of something else, I don't. This community ownership thing it's not only un-American, it just is It just doesn't seem
You know what, Bill?
Yeah, but Steve, it's good for the environment, man. It's good for the environment if not everybody has to own a car.
F the environment,
here's
Scott.
the thing,
F
no,
the environment. No one's driving my car, and no one is no. I'm not going to. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life going around in a Prius.
But this might be a symptom that's kind of unique to millennials, because they've been shunning buying houses, they've been shunning buying cars, or even getting their driver's license. And why would they? Because the economy has been so bad for them for so long. I mean, really, since they got out of school, that they've been living in their parents' basements, and it's been killing their ambition. But if we can get this economy moving again, and these kids, God, I call anybody under 30 a kid now, we get these kids making decent money for the first time in their lives, I bet you we will see home ownership and car ownership and the desire for both snap right back. But
Well,
you're wrong.
Well, we're still going to need the same amount of transportation unless people decide not to go anywhere, Bill. But you're not really talking about a difference in how many highway miles per car are necessary, or how many car miles, let's call it that way, are necessary. But you're really talking about who owns the car. And if you keep going in this direction, it'll be kind of like farms, because it used to be that 90% of the country was engaged fairly directly in the business of farming, and now like 8% or 7% of people are engaged directly in farming, and big companies like Archer Daniels Midland own most of the farmland and cultivate it or lease it out. So why not do the same thing with cars and say Archer Daniels Midland is now going to have the nation's largest fleet of cars, and we all get to use them when we wish?
And what do you think the moral tone of the country has risen, do you think, as fewer and fewer people work farms and more farms are turned over to agriculture?
You're not getting me back on the farm.
No, I'm all about as many people doing it the old way. I'm all about industrial efficiency, and I have no problem with large corporate-owned farms. But when you had 90% of the country living on farms, you had a work ethic, you had a sense of cooperation, sacrifice, you had a sense of independence, you had all of the things that are built into the American culture, or at least used to be. And these are the things that drive everything else. They drive all of it. They drive exploration. They drive technology. The idea that I can sit in my garage means I have a garage. And if I can sit there and come up with a computer means, well, maybe I might be able to do something for myself. If you take this away, you are taking away the essence of America. I can't imagine Americans who don't want to get in a car and just go for a drive.
Steve,
but that's what's happening.
Is this akin to like sharecropping, or the old when miners used to work in a town that was owned by the company and the store was owned by the company, and you had that guy singing, "I owe my soul to the company's store."
Yeah,
is this like the sharecropping plantation owner, so to speak? The new plantation owner was actually the guy who had all these sharecroppers that he sold the seed to and basically expected a return for his money, and they could never get out of that seed. Are you afraid the same thing might happen with cars?
Well, you're not going to be on, in a way, yeah, because you're on the treadmill. It's like having a standing credit card debt. Every month you've got to give that money to Visa or to MasterCard, and they
people do that now with cars that they nominally
own.
Of
you. Yeah, I realize that, but I'm one of these people. I despise debt. I borrow as little money as I possibly can get away with. A home, a car, boom, that's it. Nothing else. Everything else I can pay for cash. I pay for cash. And this idea of not owning stuff actually it leads to a real dumbing down. Apple just introduced this new TV app for iPhone and iPad a couple of months ago.
Oh, is that out?
And it replaces the old video app. And the old video app, you click videos and it'd say, here are your TV shows and here are your videos. And now that they've moved to all this streaming BS, instead of showing me the videos that I've put on my iPad, I'm presented with the list of a dinosaur movie, a dinosaur cartoon that I bought for my kids, and another thing that I bought from iTunes just because it was on sale. But the stuff that I want to see, I have to dig through the damn app to get to it, because they want to shove this rental, this streaming business model at you, so that they've dumbed it down to the app to people who go, oh, what's on, instead of showing me the things that I know I want to see, because I put them on the dang tablet.
So, Bill, but doesn't this put things in reach of average Americans that were not previously in reach? For example, I can't own a Cadillac. I don't have the means to do that. But I could possibly drive a shared Cadillac. Essentially, it's like it's like I own a timeshare or a portion of an airplane, and that I could drive it when I choose to, but I don't have all the burden of ownership. And now it opens up a vista that I didn't previously enjoy.
Yeah, that's fine. What kind of shape do you think that Cadillac's going to be in, though, after a year? Let me just put some data points down here. Would you rather swim in a pool, or would you rather swim in a public pool? Would you rather go to a restroom, or would you rather go to a public restroom? Would you rather take transportation, or would you rather have public transportation? When nobody owns it, nobody takes care of it. And I don't care what kind of maintenance budget you assign to this thing, it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. This idea that these immaculate, beautiful... reason Uber works is because the Uber drivers own those cars. They're their cars, and they take care of those cars. If nobody owned the cars would get progressively worse and worse and worse. If somebody threw up in the back of a car and you have to take over the next car, I'm not going to go in the back and clean up somebody else's vomit, but I'll do it in my car because I have friends that do that kind of thing all the time.
Yeah.
So you get the idea, right?
Shouldn't talk about
seriously.
Cleveland.
Yeah, and forget Cadillac. Uber driver's not going to pick you up in a Cadillac or a Mustang or a Camaro. They're going to pick you up in a Toyota Camry or a Prius or just something small and boring and fuel efficient. So if we go to a model where nobody owns a car anymore, we're going to go to a model where there aren't any cars that people want to own.
It's the Priusification of America, and it's not
Careful
good,
how you pronounce
Scotty.
that.
No, I know it is.
It's pre-synonymous.
It's exactly right. And if you don't, I couldn't be more serious about this. If you never have the experience of getting on the road and hitting the accelerator and driving someplace and you don't know where you're going, if you've never had that experience, I genuinely pity you.
Well,
I genuinely
Bill, this
do.
seems to be destroying the American way of life as you know it. So what should the government do to head this off?
It's not the government's problem, and I don't want the government to do anything to head this off. And the idea, look, I use Uber when I go to the airport. I use Uber when I go to a restaurant if I want to have a drink or two. But I still have my car, and I love to drive my car. It's the problem's not in the problem is not in the mechanics of these kind of transportation systems, Scott. The problem is that you've got 16, 17-year-olds who don't want to drive. It is, to me, it's indicative of this absolute loss of independence. It's a loss of risk-taking. It's a loss of freedom. It's a loss of just raw enjoyment. It's all of these things that are gone, and that's what scares me. And I think, I don't know what you do about that. You could stop treating them like infants when they stop being infants. That would be my first
Well, no, you
suggestion.
can't because they'll throw a tantrum.
Steve, now let's look back in the historical perspective. You're a couple hundred years from now. Maybe we're just looking back and saying, there was a little blip. It lasted about 100 years when everybody thought they needed to own their own car, but that passed. We wised up.
Well, I hope in 100 years from now, 200 years from now, whatever your time frame was, we're having the argument about, gosh, why don't kids want to fly in their own flying cars anymore? That's the discussion I want to be having in a couple hundred years.
We won't have that discussion. We won't have that discussion. If they're afraid to drive, they're afraid to fly. And what we'll be doing in 100 years, Scott, is sitting around our little bowls of tepid gruel, talking about those people that went out and drove their own cars and had some sense that they had some control over their own lives, that they had some sense that they could make it. And by the way, you may not be able to afford a Cadillac when you started, because I couldn't afford a Cadillac when I started either. The whole purpose of this entire process is to show you that you can actually progress through life in a way that means something other than regression. I start out with a $700 piece of junk that I can barely keep going. I have to put more oil in it than gasoline. And as I make more money, I make a decision as to whether or not I want a nicer ride. And this is part of what I consider to be growing up. This Camaro that I got in 2012 is the first new car I owned in my entire life. And I love it. And it's mine. And when I walk out to that car, every single time I walk out to that car, I go, and the same for my airplane, same for my studio too. I go, wow. So all of this work is worth something. It's not just I only get the gratification from the car, but it's an example. It's a symbol that I can see of progress that I've been making through hard work.
Well, if you look back at the history of leasing, you can actually go back pretty far. In the estimated year 2010 BC, the Sumerians were already leasing farm equipment to farmers. Back during the reign of Hammurabi in Babylon, there was that kind of leasing activity going on. In the 18th century, in England and in the United States, you could lease a horse and carriage. You didn't have to own it, the equivalent of a Camaro. You could actually lease those things. So it's been a trend for a long time. It's not something new on the scene, although Rent-A-Center is, relatively new concept. Software as a service is relatively new concept. Mobility as a service, I think, does take it to a whole new level. And I think Bill's right. You lose a certain level of freedom. I mean, maybe we save some lives of teenagers who, will not be driving around in their rust bucket jalopies like I was in my '64 Ford Falcon. But I think that there is something about growing up where you take ownership of something significant and you have to steward that. You have to be a good a caretaker of it. You have to be responsible with it, and it allows you to go places that previously you could only have imagined, that our great-grandparents couldn't have imagined because they would rarely, if ever, leave a 20-mile radius of their homes. So I think it's something that we shouldn't, like, I agree with Bill and Steve that, it's not something government needs to do, but I don't think we should enter into such decisions lightly. And I think sometimes things creep in on cat's feet that wind up getting us by the throat later, and we go, what have we lost? Yeah. Well, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. We thank you for watching this episode of Right Angle, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com.